have student presentations. There will be questions on the exam on student presentations. So make sure to pay attention, maybe take some notes. Let's see, I put up a handout on Moodle about communism. So, oh, okay. Let's try this again. So I put up a handout on communism. It'll cover the questions not covered by the Steve Forbes reading up on Moodle. So take a look at that. That'll answer a lot of the questions in the study guide. I'll put another handout up this evening, which should cover the rest of those questions. So rather than doing a review in class today, if we have time, I may spend some time reviewing questions that are covered in the readings, but I'll have another handout that would just sort of cover the rest of the material and the study guide that may not have hit in the readings or in class on Thursday. Yes?
Are you going to put up a study guide for the student presentations of which, like a selection of which parts we need to know for the presentation? I mean, I'm just going to go in and fill out all the A's.
I'm gonna say no. But are there any honor students who haven't done like the weekly summaries? So do you want to do that for this week, and people can look at that to help? Yeah.
Questions based on presentations.
Yeah, like write up some sample questions and just like a summary of what was presented in the presentations. Okay, awesome.
Make sure it's super easy.
I can do this.
So I'm not going to ask super detailed questions, but it'll be based on like the main points, just of the presentations, or if there's some surprising fact, or maybe something that during the question and answer period that takes precedence over other things. Like, I'm looking for like the sort of major themes, not I'll be nitpicking and asking really niggling little questions. So let's see. So today we have Matthew, and then Alicia, and then Shane. And I think the topics for Thursday I have up. But what are our topics? So Matthew, what's your topic?
One was surveillance on Americans post 9/11.
Okay, the government spying.
Everywhere. I should have got that free
And then Alicia, what's yours on?
Border Patrol.
Okay, borders. Border patrol, like border defense or illegal immigration.
Both.
Okay, and then Shane, what's yours on?
I was going to do it on modern medicine, but I've kind of changed it now.
So what's the new presentation on?
You might not like it. It's kind of delves into meta ethics a little bit.
All right. Well, as long as meta ethics applied to contemporary moral issues, which is the theme of the class here. We're gonna have we were gonna have a mic. I saw Randy walking around with a mic. Maybe he's gonna bring that in momentarily. Otherwise, I was gonna just hand off my my lapel mic. But we'll see. I think he's gonna be back in a bit with a mic for our presenters to use. Let me just. Any of the presenters going to be using the projector? Alicia, Jane, Mike. All right. We'll leave it off for now since Matthew and Alicia won't be using it. There we go. And you can if you want to turn on the projector and scroll on the digital whiteboard, feel free to do so.
And that's what's on right now.
Okay.
Hold that down to turn it off. I don't
Okay.
know how soon you're going to use it.
I will use it right away.
Okay.
Should I do?
Can't read it. Yeah. What it is.
Mic check, testing 1, 2, 3. Let's see if I can get some feedback. Yeah. So the recording. Can you just will this pick up if it's put down, or do you have to hold it
You
like
got to be
this?
pretty close with it.
Okay.
That's different.
All righty. Come on up.
Whoa.
Good answer, Matthew.
It's not a speech per se. In fact, this is my paper. I'm not going to read it.
So make sure to get
verbatim.
that good and close to your mouth and speak
Chuck,
like
Chuck,
that. Yeah.
Chuck. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I'm not going to read my paper verbatim, but I brought it up as a cheat sheet to keep me on task because it's easy to ramble off and nobody likes that.
Be a scoop by here.
I don't think, is this
So
for
you're gonna-
them or is
so
this for?
This is for the people in TV land, as it were.
TV land.
And on the internet. So
here's-
so make sure you're gonna have to do two things. You're gonna have to speak into the microphone, but also like project to the people in the classroom here. So maybe
Hopefully.
you don't even need to be as hot on it if you're going to be speaking loudly, which you'll need to do.
I usually have no trouble speaking loudly. You guys might have noticed that. Okay, so I'm Matthew Watkins, and I'm hoping to discuss, as Professor Borrowdale put it, government spies, i.e. Government spying on civilians after the September 11th attacks. So at least in my paper, what I started out with was discussing that in February 1933, the German Capitol building, the Reichstag, caught on fire. Bunch of firefighters showed up, responded to the scene, swept the building, and they found a young Dutch man with associations with the Communist Party there. And what the Nazis did at the time was they whipped the public into a frenzy of fear that communist infiltration was everywhere. We were supposed to be terrified, or they were supposed to be terrified, and they were able to consolidate power based on the fear that the attack on the Reichstag generated. I use that as a metaphor because I think that it is a common thread in human societies that when there's a threat, a perceived threat or a real threat, when there's an attack, the people and the institutions that are in power have often exploited that to consolidate their own power. In our case, this is funny to me because a lot of you guys are younger, and it doesn't seem like very long ago, but September 11th, 2001, when the World Trade Center and the Pentagon were attacked, similar things occurred within our own government. So within a month, the USA Patriot Act was introduced to the U.S. Congress. The Patriot Act was an acronym for Uniting and Strengthening America by Providing Appropriate Tools for the Intercept and Obstruction of Terrorism. And it kind of played on our own sentimentality. I mean, if you grew up in America, are you not a patriot if you love your country? I mean, I love my country. I consider myself a patriot. You know, why wouldn't you support the Patriot Act? Unfortunately, the benevolent sounding act had some inclusions in it that were less than benevolent and contrary to what I believe be the Constitution of this land. Essentially, it radically expanded the surveillance power of government law enforcement agencies with the presumption that they were going to be using that to prevent and fight terrorism within the country. But, you know, Section 215, for example, allowed for very broad sweeping language, the seizure of any tangible thing within an investigation, whether or not the person involved in that investigation was actually suspected of terrorist activities. Sometimes they might be 3 or 4 people away. Maybe you talk to the guy in line at the grocery store. But some of the things that are known to have been included are your emails, library records, browser histories. So this overturned 200 years of legal precedent in this country of the protections that are based under the Fourth Amendment against unreasonable search and seizure. These agencies could confiscate the information, and they're not required to get a warrant to do it. It also included provisions that allowed for sneak and peek searches, i.e., previously you needed a warrant to enter someone's home. But if they're a subject of an investigation, you can go in, poke around, see what's in there. So that the Patriot Act was the first major legislation to pass post 9/11, and it's still in practice today. It's been amended countless times, but the major provisions are renewed yearly. Some of them have been made into permanent law, and some of them still have sunset clauses on them so that they'll lapse over time. And the critics from both major parties worried that exempting law enforcement from judicial oversight undermines the protections we have built into our Constitution. And that they're not just, in the name of preventing terrorism, they were opening the door for civil liberties of citizens who pose no threat to the nation, but maybe have views that are opposed to the prevalent view of the parties in power. And unfortunately, they were correct. One report from the Inspector General's office from 2007 showed that the FBI, for example, had practiced widespread, what they quote, widespread and serious abuse of its authority in the implementation of the Act's provisions. The report claimed the agency had utilized and expanded surveillance power to investigate people who had no visible connection to terrorism. This is when surveillance actually did come around. It was an auditor, basically, who did this, the Inspector General. The subjects of these investigations are never even required to be notified that they occur. So, I mean, maybe some of you guys have written something that was deemed inflammatory, and then your browser histories or emails are going through. It's hard to say, and you're never going to know. Another thing that they attempted to do post 9/11, and this one was really interesting, terrorist information and prevention system. It was proposed on New Year's Day. Fortunately, this one failed, but the Justice Department was essentially, the acronym was TIPS. They were trying to recruit volunteers from industries that work within people's homes. So your cable installer, your phone company, technician, contractors working on remodels in your house, and have them as a volunteer agency basically snoop around the houses of people that they're in. Because because they weren't government employees, they weren't subject to the same scrutiny as government employees are in performing these things. This was announced. Fortunately, it was shot down, but it's a travesty nonetheless that the government was saying, let's recruit a volunteer group of people to snoop in your homes and tell us what you see in there. There's a bunch of these. Capri 2, or CAPS 2, sorry, another project was made available in February of 2002. It essentially created a database of all Americans and collected data on you from government agencies, any forms you fill out, but also private entities, so your credit card companies, your utility companies, anyone they deemed might have information to do it. But the problem with this was that this was not targeting people suspected of criminal behavior. It was compiling a database of everyone. It's pretty ridiculous. And that did get implemented, and it was implemented until July of 2004 when it sunsetted. July of the same year, the Bush administration created the National Joint Terrorism Task Force, mission of coordinating state, local, federal agencies, as well as the military, in at least one instance that's known, the CIA. This was also in the name of fighting terrorism, and it was surrounded in secrecy because the members of this agency are working on things that are deemed national security. It is known that it expanded the number of anti-terrorism agents to 4,400 or more after the creation of this entity. FOIA requests on the Joint Terrorism Task Force from 2004, 2005, and 2006 were issued by the American Civil Liberties Union. It took a lot of delay, and when they finally got it, they demonstrated clearly the task force had been used to investigate the political activities of Americans who were unrelated to terrorism. And bear in mind, this is nonpartisan. This is if you're an anti-war hippie and you're out there holding a sign, you're subject to that scrutiny, and you probably have been investigated. If you're a Tea Party, small government person, you're probably being subject to investigation because you're not going with a prevalent theory. And that's the danger in these surveillance and data recovery laws, is the abuse of power and what it does to our privacy. The Total Information Awareness Program. This was another program that had been announced, and it was cut because of public outcry. Essentially, it was another database program that sought to contain the personal information, including your activities and your purchases, of every single American. Despite the public outcry, some of the more controversial work was handed over to the National Security Agency, where it was wrapped in secrecy, and we'll never know about it. Homeland Security, that was also created post 9/11, and this was an essentially interesting part of American history because for the first time that happened in my lifetime that I was aware of, an executive order created a branch of government. It was finalized by Congress with the Homeland Security Act a couple of years later, and it essentially bundled a bunch of agencies into one. Theoretically, because of the lack of communication between the various agencies, they wanted to expedite the process. But I don't know if any of you saw the Hurricane Katrina cleanup, it didn't seem to work so well because that was under the Homeland Security Agency, as well as regulation of domestic and state law enforcement agencies, not to mention expanding an already bloated government. An audit from the Attorney General's office over Homeland Security showed, for example, in 2007, I believe it was, they wasted over $15 billion in failed contracts, and somebody had purchased over $70,000 in plastic dog booties. Who knows what the heck that was for? Little dog booties go on dogs' feet. $70,000 worth. Someone within the agency saw it fit to do that. But being a hyper super secret government agency, they're not subject to the same scrutiny as other ones. Okay. The following year, let's see, we are now on 2003. The Defense Department, or DoD, established what was called the Threat and Local Observation Notice, with the nice acronym TALON. And the purpose of this was to protect military installations and personnel from terrorist threats. Persons investigated were added to a database of perceived threats. And after this information was also FOIA requested, that's Freedom of Information Act by the ACLU, they showed that people had been added to the database who were known to be non-violent anti-war activists, posed no clear and present danger, but their names were never removed from the database. And it compiled information on a lot of people. Okay. So, let's see, 2005, December, another story on the Newswire came out that exposed that the National Security Agency had been operating a warrantless wiretapping program. And that doesn't sound in unison with the Fourth Amendment as well. They've been eavesdropping on the international emails and phone calls of American citizens in what became known as the warrantless wiretapping program. And the moniker states this was illegal. They were doing it without warrants, but it was done under executive order and had been done since 2002. So for years they did it. Now the problem with this is in direct violation of the FISA, which is a Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which was passed in 1977 for the exact same reason, because the government had been using national security apparatus to spy on people with whom they disagreed who held no political danger toward the establishment. So they said, okay, the executive branch under Nixon and previous administrations had been violating the law and spying on these people. And they said, well, we need to do this without compromising national security if we investigate someone. They said, fine, we'll pass this act, we'll create a special court system, and the special court system will expedite warrants to tap and intercept the phone calls at the time, and now emails, of people who are a threat to national security without compromising the investigation and making it public. Well, after 2002, apparently that wasn't quick enough. And once again, you have people eavesdropping on, who knows, we don't know how many people talking outside of the country from within, and no judicial oversight. This information was also FOIA requested, and the only documentation ever released was in 2011, even though the program had been exposed in 2005, and it was so heavily redacted that nobody really knows what's being done. So this brings it to, what is the moral issue of this information? See, most of these post-September 11 laws and programs come in the guise of protecting us. And most of us want to be safe. And most of us think terrorism's bad, which I agree. But it doesn't make a difference who's in the White House. Most of these programs are still in place. Doesn't make a difference what administration. And the ones who rail against it when one administration holds a power are quick to embrace it when they come to power. And the reason is, I think, on a moral level, this institutes a flaw of human character. People who have power want to consolidate their power at the expense of the people who don't. And this highlights a bigger problem in our government, which is that the people who founded this government did so in a unique way. They separated the powers. We have judges to watch that the laws are legal. We have Congress to pass the laws, and we have the executive to implement the laws. The judges and the executive are not supposed to make the laws. Once again, they're supposed to review and implement them. So when you get executive decrees, they bear striking resemblance to royal proclamations. When you have somebody there saying, I'm going to make this whole new branch of government. Sure, why not? He's the president, because the president is not supposed to have that power. And the people who founded this country, they knew the cost and they knew the danger of tyranny. And that cost and danger cost a lot of their companions and them their lives and their fortunes and their health. And so when they establish this country, the first thing they do is set limits on the power of government. And we, in our lifetimes, have watched that erode away. And it's been eroding away for some time. But the moral issue is that we've become complacent. We've become complacent as the executive power stretches beyond what it was supposed to be, as the judicial power isn't calling it into check, and as Congress works to get reelected, apparently. And they've expanded the power of the executive to fight a perpetual war since September 11th. A blank check on war that we haven't cashed in all the way yet. We're still cashing it. And that blank check's going. Congress is supposed to issue the proclamations of war, and we're supposed to know when the war has a decisive end. A lot of these things have happened, and we sit and what do? We allow the government to survey us, to collect information on us, to create a database of anti-war hippies, to create a database of rednecks out shooting pumpkins in the woods. So, and we allow them to create that database of information on ourselves. It's easy to think about it when it's that guy or that guy. And you're like, wow, they know I watch a lot of porn. So we reflect back on the intent of our founders of this country. And ours was a unique government. It placed limits, not on its citizenry, but on its government. So rather than remain idle, trusting they have our best protection and interest in mind, we should be reflecting on Ben Franklin's quote when he said, they who give up essential liberty to obtain a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety.
Okay, let's take a few minutes for questions.
Anyone? What do you got, man?
Have you heard anything about Tripwire?
Tripwire. Nope, I'm not familiar with that program.
Well, is it Trapwire or Tripwire? I don't. It's the new internet activity monitoring software that has been deployed.
Well, apparently, the Obama administration is saying cybersecurity is their new biggest threat. So I'm sure that probably falls in line, but I'm not familiar with it.
In your opinion, where do we go from here? How do we get back to government, keeping our government in check?
Well, that's also a matter of philosophy. I think my own philosophy is that a lot of what empowers the government is we give it that power. You know, when we comply with things that are unreasonable, when we comply with the demand that we respect a certain authority, then we're legitimizing that authority. A lot of it. Have you ever had a cop walk up to you in a park and go, "Hey, you can't be here"? You know, rather than just say, "Why not?" Most people just say, "Oh, okay." And they've just legitimized that authority, whether they meant to or not. They may even go around the corner and talk a lot of smack about what he just made them do, rather than stop and call into question, how am I legitimizing these people's authority? And what little ways do I live in my daily life that empowers them and not me, and not you, and not you, and not you? That's the metaphysical answer. Hang on, we'll get this guy, then I'll get Barry. I forget your name?
Evan.
Evan.
Yeah, I've got a piece of philosophy that I've always kind of hung on to because I totally agree where you're coming from. And it comes from Hunter S. Thompson. I forget what book he wrote it in. I think it was Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail of 72. And the line was, in a society where we're already all considered criminals, the only true crime is getting caught. The only final sin in the land of thieves is stupidity.
Now that is food for thought. And Barry, what do you got?
Do you think things like the Patriot Act and other acts like that would be viewed differently or acted upon differently if there was a real declaration of war? In other words, going back to the Civil War, habeas corpus was suspended during the Civil War. But I think a lot of that was because Lincoln had no choice. There was a declared war. He had to do something to give his side an advantage, okay, basically. So again, if there, let's say, if we had a declared war against, I don't know, Iran, okay, do you think we would look at the Patriot Act differently? Do you think the government would view their implementation of the Patriot Act differently?
Well, it's interesting. I think historically, World War I, the Espionage Act that was passed.
Let me see if I can break in here. My mic's not picking up as well as it
Oh, yeah.
should. I'm just gonna put this on
Clip
here.
is on me. All right. Woohoo. How's that? Okay. So what I was saying, at World War I, Wilson expanded government powers a lot, even to the point of stifling criticism. People who were opposed to the war were arrested and jailed. That generally does generate more support in the public historically when there's a visible threat. But part of that, like I said, the formal concept of war is different than what we're dealing with here, because the formal concept, there's a nation state who's your enemy and or the ideology embraced by that state, and a clear and visible line when you say, when we cross this line, we've won the war. And that usually allows for things like sunset clauses or something that at least semi-legitimizes the powers, taking that step over power, knowing that it's going to go back to how it was or something similar when the conflict is over. Here, like I said, we have a blank check. We're fighting an ideology. There's,
how is the concept of terrorism ever going to surrender?
how do we know when we won? What is it, Kate?
You mentioned some sort of law put forth that, something where they monitor all your activity and all your purchases. What was that called?
Well, it was proposed, unfortunately, that one, there's so many of them.
I know,
just
so
read,
similar.
that was called a Total Information Awareness Program. And it was in November of 2002 that it became public that this was a program that was being worked on.
Oh, did they enact that? They did do
No, that one was shut down.
Okay.
And then there was another one. Let's see, is that the first one? Let's see.
About, caps, and then you talked about anybody with subversive views, they would just be subject to search, but.
Well, and like I said, a lot of times it was search in secret. It's not like getting pulled over and your car gone through. It's like someone's in your house and looking through all your information and you don't know about it.
Did you
How-
have any ways that we could prevent, not prevent.
Bear traps?
Just, no, how we could, like paying in cash or proxies on our browsers that we could use. Did you, ways to combat this, but to stay anonymous from the government? Are there any possible ways?
Maybe that should be one of your research projects. I'm sure it's worth doing. And yes, paying in cash is certainly not keeping that tab on what you're buying that it does every time you swipe a debit card. But that's an interesting thought, and it's something to maybe think about longer.
We have to do on the next speaker.
Oh, yeah,
What
I'll
is
make
it
it quick. So it seems like the obvious counter-argument that the powers that be in the government are going to offer is that if you're not doing anything wrong, what do you have to be worried about? What would you say to that type of viewpoint?
If I'm not doing anything wrong, I should have the right to be left alone. first of all, that's what I would say, and that flips that concept of what is the role of government. The role of government is not to show that I'm not doing anything wrong, it's to prevent anything from happening to me if I'm not doing anything wrong. And you and
So
everyone
you
here.
think we've lost sight of that then?
I think we've definitely lost sight, and we've allowed the role of government to expand far beyond what its intention is, at least in this country, where, like I said, it was established by placing limits on the authority of government and limits on what government can do, and then checks and balances between separate powers to try and keep it that way.
And if you're interested in, there's certain things you can do like online. If you're interested in protecting your privacy, you can encrypt your emails. You can you cannot. You can use a private email server and use like a client like Outlook and not keep your emails all there on Gmail or Yahoo for them to scan. And you can go to their search engines like startpage.com, which don't track you like Google does. Or if you're going to use Google, don't sign in beforehand. There was a recent bill that just passed, CISPA, CISPA, the Cyber Intelligence Service Protection Act, something like Surveillance Protection Act. And that would have allowed these big companies like Google that have a lot of data on you to share them with the government without telling you. Now, thankfully, that passed the House but failed in the Senate. But you have to worry about not only the data the government's gathering, but private industry can gather data. And then if the government ever gets the right to search that data, it's there, and you can't sort of take it back once it's out there in the cloud or with some corporation. Down to all the things you buy at Safeway with your club card and everything you've ever searched on the internet, all there for the government to peruse. Okay, our next speaker, Alicia, will be talking about, what's your topic again?
Border control.
Border control. Okay. Could you put that to your top of your blouse there, and then just take this and just put this in your front pocket there and kind of stuff the line as you trip over it.
Like that? Okay. Awesome. Okay, so
Project so the people in the back can hear you. Have kind of quiet voice.
okay. Border control / border patrol has been here in the United States since 1904, but wasn't regularly controlled or strongly enforced until 1924, when resources permitted. The overall goal of Border Patrol, they have an updated strategy, and it has 5 objectives, which are to apprehend terrorists and terrorist weapons entering the United States. Second, deter illegal entries through improved enforcement. Third, detect, apprehend, and deter smuggling of humans, drugs, and other contraband. Fourth, to use smart border technology. And fifth, to reduce crime in border communities, improving the quality of life. The objectives to me seem really fair and useful to anyone who supports Border Patrol. And I feel like it's a necessary and a working part of our nation's security. One issue that Border Patrol stops or slows down at least is the issue of letting in drugs into our United States. Yes, there are drugs here of all different kinds, but according to the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol just last year, 2,323,523 pounds of drugs were seized at border sectors. These seizures included marijuana, cocaine, methamphetamines, heroin, ecstasy, and a category of other drugs, which I don't know what's in that category.
What was that number again?
2,323,523 pounds. It's estimated that only 1 in 3 immigrants are caught when they're coming over. So we can only imagine the amount of drugs that do get into our country if that amount was seized. I found that even with very active patrol on the border, an estimated 500,000 illegal immigrants get into the country each year. Another issue that I found was crime rate. There was a sample study done on illegal immigrants, and it was found in this study that there was an average of 8 arrests per immigrant. Nearly all had 1 arrest in this study. 38% had between 2 and 5, 32% had between 6 and 10, and 26% had 11 or more arrests. And the amount of crimes that each committed, the amount was a really large number, but that's because with each arrest, there was, 4 or 5 crimes. Because if anyone's ever been arrested, they tag on anything they can. I also found that illegal immigrants comprise over 25% of the federal prison population, even though they're only 5% of our population, which in other words means that a community of 5% is committing about 25% of the crimes. Some will argue that our jobs are at risk here in the United States, but I personally think that if Americans would just, if they were really worried about it, they would do the jobs that are saved for people who want to work hard at them, the hard labor jobs. One of the examples in class was like picking strawberries or something. So if Americans were willing to work those jobs, then no one would be here stealing them. Somewhere in the middle of the pros and cons of border control lie opinions of people who are somewhat for border patrol and against some aspects of it, like the people who are getting killed that are actually innocent. There's been some cases of teenagers who are near the border but not trying to sneak over, but they get killed on accident. The opinion is that there could be a physical fence across the entire border from, at least from California to Texas. And arguments against that kind of fence include the manpower, labor, and supplies that it would take, and also that it would be a poor reflection on the United States, comparing this fence to the Berlin Wall. But an argument that I have opposing that is that the Berlin Wall was to keep people in, and this fence would be to enforce U.S. laws and keep illegal immigrants from coming in undocumented. A counter for the labor argument is that the unemployment rate in some states is almost 10%, and a heavy need for manpower would eliminate some of those people that have been standing in the unemployment line for years. Supplies would be an expense since this fence would have to cover almost 2,000 miles of land, including desert. But a counter to the cost is that keeping more immigrants from crossing would save Americans billions just in educational expenses. I found that the cost of providing education, just elementary, middle, and high school, is about $11.2 billion. And now, as we talked about in class, college tuition is being offered at the in-state price if you have gone to school, for 5 years and graduate and show intent to become a citizen. But if they do as Americans do, which they probably would, just borrow from the government to go to college, making the United States debt even higher. I found very limited arguments against some form of border patrol. The arguments were that keeping people out of America is like saying that it's off limits to outsiders, and that it's unethical to keep someone out just because they were born on the wrong side of the border, which kind of boils down to me to a human rights type of thing. But this can only be argued so far because America isn't off limits. It's just that there's a process that you have to go through to become a citizen. And if you go through that process, you can come here and live your life and be happy, So I think that is all that I have. Questions? Yes?
Start out. People argue that one of the reasons we have a lot of illegal immigration is because we only let in a certain number of immigrants every year, and the demand to get into the States far outstrips the number of spots that we have for people. And so that encourages people to break the law, because it's not easy to get into the U.S., to get a green card, to have a legal right to cross over. So if you're a person from a poor country, you want to do work, there's work to be had, but we don't have enough spots for them. And also maybe people from, say, India or Asia who have some really great skills, like they're engineers, or they're in the high-tech industry, want to go to Silicon Valley to work, to innovate, to help American countries there. We place these artificial barriers, keeping out the labor we need and the skills we need and people who would enrich our culture, because we have these really big restrictions on how many can come in, what type, and then the paperwork and the expense is really high too. Like if you're an illegal immigrant, you're like a day laborer, and then you have to come up with, like, say, $700 American to get legal status. That can be pretty tough, or even more. Yeah. So I think 700 was a number I heard a few years ago. It's gone up. Yeah. So what would you say about those arguments that illegal immigration is encouraged by our system, which makes it very difficult to come to America and isn't welcoming to new people?
I do agree that it's really hard to come into America. I had a class, Racial and Ethnic Issues, and he gave us a paper that asked some questions that are asked of illegal immigrants before they can come in, and half the class couldn't answer them. It was like, American citizens can't answer questions that illegal immigrants need to answer to come into our country. So I do think that it's unfair, the hoops they have to jump through. I would say, I guess to answer your question, that it shouldn't be so hard. And if there are spots open here to let people in, why don't we? I don't really have a good argument against the part where you asked if their skills are going to be used here. I don't know. We should let them in. They should come here.
Zach, did you have a different question? Or
Yeah, I did, actually.
Well, hold that thought for just a minute. One reason might be American workers don't like competition. They're worried about their wages dropping, or a more qualified Indian engineer getting their job that they're applying for in Silicon Valley. So that might be part of it.
That makes me feel like Americans should work harder if they really want to protect everything. Then if there's competition, then bring it on, make yourself better.
My question was just, I was actually talking about this topic with somebody the other day, and the concept of people who are born in America having to earn their citizenship came up, because that's actually a pretty common problem. If you ask people, how many American presidents have there been? I've had people tell me 28, and I'm like, congratulations, you're really close. So, it's an interesting concept. What if, maybe we went the Starship Troopers route where you had to do federal service or something. But, a lot of Americans who are Americans because they were born here, I feel really haven't earned their citizenship in any meaningful way. I meet a lot of them, they're on the dole and not doing anything.
And that could be a good compromise, is that if you want to remain a U.S. citizen, you need to prove it. Like if other people have to, then why don't we? It's kind of like the we are the world's police type of idea, Yes?
Is border control specifically, is it supported by the Constitution?
I do not know. I don't know. Does anyone know?
Somebody else want to?
Sure. Well, out of everybody here, I'm not as familiar with all the things explicitly listed in the Constitution, but it seems like that they set up this country as a place to escape. If you're having an awful time in the country that you were born in, if you're being harassed for your religion, or all those things that we talk about. It seems contrary to why America was founded to me, and just the fact that we even have borders, besides the population control situation, specifically that, it's not just drug smugglers and horrible people coming. wherever you go, there's going to be people
Oh, yeah.
that you find that are exactly like the people who you're surrounded with right now. You can't escape a certain, there aren't just spots typically where there's just really horrible. The whole concept of a border is really strange to me. I mean, there should be like a flux of people. If more people come into our country, then, you know, more people leave, I think it would happen naturally.
I did read something that said that there is a human right to leave your country if you feel you're unfairly treated, or to go back to your country whenever you want. So that kind of is backwards from what I was just saying.
By the way, this hits on. By the way, to interject, this hits on the extra credit. There's an extra credit form for the cable students. Woody Harrelson's just come out as an anarchist, and there's an article there about the whole legitimacy of government and what government is. But it seems like part of what government is, it includes a territory with borders and control over who comes in and out of those borders, who's a citizen, who's not a citizen, and that's implied in the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was just sitting here thinking about it. I think it devolves down to the ability of Congress to declare war and make treaties. And immigration is an agreement between the two countries, usually. So I think that's the closest you can get constitutional.
Executive power to secure the colony and all the
I don't know who was first.
I think Robert had his hand up.
Okay.
I was going to say something about the Second Amendment and the militias, people of their own sovereign nations protecting themselves from domestic and foreign, enemies, or whatever they want to label it as. I think that has more to do with it, people standing up for their own vested space, their own vested interests, rather than giving somebody else power to do that for you. I think you're saying better yourself. I think standing up for your own space is bettering yourself at the same time. And so I don't know if it becomes a moral issue or how much space is their issue.
I have an argument in favor of closing, keeping the border closed, and it doesn't have anything to do with imposing on other people's rights or just trying to keep people out to preserve, the American way of life. But I've learned from experience that when you have a lot of concentration of human beings in one area, it is hard on the land. You're using up natural resources, and the more people you have in a specific area, the faster you use it up. And often those resources can't be replenished very quickly. So if
or
you
cheaply.
So when you have this one country and you're letting everybody in, and everybody from around the world wants to come to this one little specific piece of land, what's going to happen to that? Humans are going to be producing waste, we're going to be producing garbage, and I just see that as an argument to keep people out.
A lot of our produce, it's actually shipped from Mexico. I mean,
Yeah.
but that's true. That the population is like 50%.
One of the first things you did was list 5 objectives. So, can you repeat those?
Yeah, definitely. One was to apprehend terrorists and terrorist weapons. 2 was deter illegal entries through improved enforcement. Detect, apprehend, and deter smuggling of humans, drugs, and contraband. Use smart border technology. And reduce crime in border communities, improving quality of life.
Okay. And then one other thing. You said that immigrants have a higher arrest rate. It's 5% of the population with 25% of the prison population. What kind of arrests, what kind of crimes are they committing?
It said that it didn't say specifics, but it said it was a higher amount of violent crimes.
Okay.
That's the one thing I did read about it.
Okay, thank you.
Barry?
If it can be shown that immigrants from certain countries present a clear and present danger, or the potential for a clear and present danger, should immigration from those countries be completely closed? For example, Iran, Yemen, Saudi Arabia,
Does that
Algeria, Libya.
Does that turn into like a discriminatory?
Well, that's what I'm asking.
I think it kind of does. I mean, because not every, I mean, that's kind of grouping like the whole country into one stereotype, and it seems kind of unfair.
I was gonna say, I live in a building right now with probably about 50 people that I know about. I know at least 30 of them are from Yemen. There are several others that are from other Middle Eastern countries, and I don't feel threatened by them at all.
You're aware we did do this with China, right? We closed our borders to China.
Oh, yeah.
Chinese Exclusion Act.
I didn't know that.
But we still get,
It's not unheard
we
of.
still get Chinese scholarships.
Yeah.
Understand,
It's
yeah.
true.
Those, the bombers, the Boston bombers were from a country that was a hotbed of Islamic extremism.
And are they not
And,
allowed to come?
If we had
through?
like exclusions or at least greater scrutiny towards those countries, that might act as it might serve the apprehending terrorism, apprehended terrorists.
Maybe there
function.
should be levels of, you know,
Well,
I don't know.
I was watching a movie last night, and it was in this embassy, and these people were trying to get American visas, and this crowd was like trying to kill them for getting American visas. So I mean, where are these levels? Who are we actually appeasing? It's hard to say.
What do you think of the concept of immigration policy being based on a cultural similarity and assimilation? You know,
Like
that
similarity to Americans?
well, like
or?
a lot of the focus is usually on Latinos, and actually, I mean, for me, I grew up in a rural community where there's a high Latino population, and once the language thing is aside, I mean, the difference is like Catholic and Protestant, but unlike the Irish, we didn't blow each other up. We I'd go to hit a pinata, drink some beers with the guys, but you know, they for me, for like a real redneck, you know, I mean, it was, you know, they respected their moms, you know, and they worked their butts off, and you know, you get a couple beers in them, you're just another dude. Whereas, you know, there are some countries around the world where, you know, the outlooks and the basic philosophy on life is drastically different than the outlook of what I'd say, I mean, I hate to say the average American, but at least the prevailing sort of belief system within America. You know, like you know, say an Iraqi or someone who thinks if his daughter dates someone or he catches her sleeping with her boyfriend, he has a right to kill her. You know,
like different, I guess, like moral values they do make a big difference. If you're, you know, from a different country and you want to come here, some of our standards may be very wrong to you. So I see that point too.
Potential to shift the moral values here.
Maybe that would be a good thing. I don't know. Yes?
I just want to respond to that. I mean, if you were for small government, I would think that allowing the government to make those value judgments on you as a person, I think that's problematic. But I do agree. I mean, like we've discussed in class, I don't know if I agree with this specifically, because that's sort of making a judgment about people's value and their ability to change, I suppose, or adapt. But you know, the more that you're alike, the people that you surround and the community you live in, the probably fewer problems that are going to happen.
It's a hard one to choose a side on.
I have one last question, and that's about the welfare state argument. So the argument is, I think you make a good point here, that if you look at the cost of illegal immigrations for health, welfare, criminal justice, it's huge, and it vastly outstrips the value that illegal immigrants give to in terms of cheap labor. The education cost alone for K through 12 outstrips any benefit to the economy. So what if you made the argument here that this isn't an argument against immigration, it's an argument in favor of reducing the welfare state? The problem isn't the immigrants, the problem is all these benefits from the government that are being offered to citizens as well as non-citizens, and that's really the issue, not the immigration.
Yeah, because if they're, you know, undocumented, then how are they, I mean, getting welfare, but how are they paying back any of that? Because, you know, oh, I don't have an income, I need government assistance, and that does turn into a big expense.
In response to what you said, my initial question, I forgot to ask it, if we stopped hunting people that were trying to come over the border, if we did away with the border, think of all the money that we would save trying to patrol it, trying to jail these people for.
There's an
The
insane
violent
amount
crimes
of
makes,
people.
really people crimes that make sense, but they'll take an enormous amount of money so we could properly educate them and do, I mean, children, obviously, adults, I don't assume that they're not educated. So
Yeah.
I don't know, I just think we could save it an astronomical amount of money if we stop spending it on trying to figure something out.
I don't remember the number, but Border Patrol employs, I don't know the number, a lot of people though. You know, they all have a salary.
If you compare the Border Patrol budget it gave, so if you compare the Border Patrol budget with the amount of the health, welfare, criminal justice costs that are paid to take care of illegal immigrants, the numbers still work out in favor of Border Patrol enforcement, just because the numbers are so huge for the welfare costs of people who are largely poor and uneducated. But if you did something like you got rid of subsidies to single mothers, you got rid of the minimum wage, you had people save for their own retirement and got rid of Social Security,
People might leave.
and you
here
got rid of a
then.
lot of those
Yeah.
things, then you'd have a lot of, you'd have basically a lot of cheap labor available. You probably have a boom in business. People with good skills would still do well in society, but the high school dropouts would find themselves competing with more illegal aliens. And that might be pressure on them to get an education now.
Mhm.
But it's the fact that we have this big welfare state and then all these poor people coming in who become dependent on it that creates the problem. Well, let's take our break. Thanks, Alicia.